so please be aware that this session is being recorded at this time. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for making time to join us today for the general membership meeting. As I mentioned in my earlier email, today's session is really going to be devoted to the TA. There is other M&P business as well as open enrollment information that will be coming in early November to the membership. But today we're just going to focus on the TAs. So I'm Samantha Johnson, the president of M&P. For those who are not aware, welcome to everyone. We've got a pretty quick and dirty agenda for today, so let's hop right into it. For those who are not aware, this does represent your current M&P board. I do want to give a shout out to our newest director, David Payne, who joined our ranks by board appointment back in September. Welcome, Dave. Thrilled to have you with us. And with that, let's get into the nitty gritty. So I do just want to give just a quick highlight to the strategy that M&P employed this time in negotiations, which deviated a bit from our last session. It was an intentional effort to negotiate both contracts together at the same time. So if you are curious which contract you fall under, if you are an appointed employee, so your employment is at the pleasure of City Council and the mayor, then you are M&P-A. If you were hired through civil service, then you are a classified employee and you are subject to the M&P-B contract. In terms of those of us who participated on negotiations, we have had a mix of M&P-A and M&P-B employees, and certainly a pretty extensive effort was undertaken during our past president's tenure, Dave Kokot, to initiate feedback from the membership, surveys. We very intentionally wanted to have your feedback to consider as we were going through this process. The other big change this time is that the M&P attorney was included on the negotiation team. For the sake of the rest of our conversation, please note that both TAs are 5-year agreements, retroactive to January 1 of 2022. Our previous contracts expired at the end of 2021, and both contracts expire at the end of 2026. With the information that I'm going to share and provide, it is the same for both M&P-A and M&P-B unless I have otherwise indicated. So let's talk about the thing that everybody really wants to know about. Show me the money, right? It is important to note that M&P was very insistent in our negotiations that all of our wage adjustments needed to take effect as of January 1. This is a deviation from Local 270's contract. Their wage adjustments are largely effective on July 1st, with the exception of 2024, that does not adjust until October. I don't know why the city negotiated that differently for Local 270 than for M&P, but for all of the rates I'm about to show you, they will be effective for M&P as of January 1st. So, as I mentioned, we have two contracts, A and B. Please note indicated over on the left side of the screen. For 2022 and 2023, both M&P-A and M&P-B are looking at 5% wage increases, and that was intentionally front-loaded. The negotiations team was very insistent upon that in the interest of compounding effects to our wages, not to mention the expectation that based on what Local 270 is receiving, obviously our wages need to maintain that certain level of competitiveness, right? So for 2022 and 2023, we're looking at 5% respectively. 2025 is a CPI-based wage adjustment between 2.5 and 4%. That is the same range that Local 270 achieved. And our contract goes into 2026 with a CPI-based range of 1 to 3%. Now, the year of important deviation is 2024. And again, it is important to note that unlike Local 270, our increases will take effect 6 months earlier. The reason that the MNPA rate is listed at 4% and the classified B rate is listed at 2.75% is because 2024 is the year that we have negotiated to restore personal leave to the MNP-B contract. So that effective 1.25% was negotiated by the city to offset the restoration of that personal leave for the Bs. Obviously, Local 270 received the $2,000 one-time bonus compensation in 2021. It was not an option for us to renegotiate our contract for 2021 because we were still under contract at that point. However, the negotiations team did very specifically bring up that payout. We went round and round with the city about that. Where we landed in our negotiations group was that ultimately, by getting the extra 6 months of compensation for 2022, that was a better deal in our minds than pushing for the one-time bonus payout that Local 270 received. So I do want to acknowledge we are aware that that one-time payout is not included in the M&P contract. We've argued very vociferously that just like Local 270, we are essential workers, and there's no reason that we should not have received that payout. But we also have to be realistic in what the city will grant us, right? And ultimately, 6 months of retro pay, I think for a lot of us, is going to be in excess of the take home off that $2,000 bonus anyway. Again, the intention here with these wages was to front load as much as possible the percentage increases. So that is why the choice was made not to immediately restore personal leave because of that cost negotiated, the 1.25%. We did not want that to come out of 2022 or 2023. We wanted everybody to see as much in the way of wage increases as promptly as possible. And we will get more into the discussion about leave here shortly. I do also want to note that the parties have negotiated to perform a wage and compensation study, which will be completed and negotiated for implementation during the term of this agreement. This applies for both A and B contracts. Obviously, the likelihood, given the state of HR, is that it will take the city some time to complete this wage and compensation study. The implementation will likely occur towards the tail end of the agreement. And that was yet another reason that we wanted to keep these percentages front loaded for that compounding effect as much as possible. It is also important to note that there are a laundry list of compensation related issues that M&P has agreed to continue to discuss with the city. So our salary versus hourly pay structure issue around those employees who are overtime eligible will continue to be negotiated and dispositioned in labor management, as well as a standard for back pay for those employees who are reclassified, and out of grade project pay and on-call pay are all still going to be subjects that we will discuss through labor management. Ideally, M&P would have liked to see these topics addressed in the course of contract negotiations so we could get clear language in there for everybody. But we did have to be a bit realistic about the city's current, bandwidth issues, given what's occurred with HR. So thrilled to still be able to have those discussions going forward, and there will be further updates on those as they are addressed in labor management. It is also relevant to note, particularly for those employees out in the fire department, that the existing language around all risk mobilizations has been added to the contract. So there's effectively no change for those employees who were impacted by all risk mobs. Okay, going into benefits. For insurance, obviously, given the timing of everything, it's impossible for us to have negotiated changes for 2022 or realistically 2023. So there is no change for the first 2 years of the contract to our current insurance. However, the parties have agreed to bargain in the coming year for changes that will be implemented at the beginning of 2024. And that means all of the things that have been requested by the membership and discussed in our various committees are still on the table in terms of access to other medical plans for other bargaining units, addressing the restoration of Providence coverage, as well as potential elimination of the HRA, and of course, review of all associated costs. So that will be occurring in 2023. We have not established the process for that yet, but we are just as ready to go as we were in negotiations to tackle that with the city this coming year. The one thing that the parties did agree on is that the city will quarterly share information with M&P regarding premiums and claims that are coming in, as well as prompt disclosure of insurance rate in advance of new rates being set to the membership. And this will hopefully enable M&P to be much more proactive in terms of keeping an eye on and suggesting modifications to the city's current practice around our insurance. The hope is that this may facilitate our benefits committee to spend some additional time on that oversight of city costs. Also relevant to note, no negotiated change to CSRS or our retirement language. The language is being cleaned up to reflect the current practice, but employees will effectively see no change in contributions or payouts for CSRS. Now delving into leave. As I mentioned, personal leave. There is no change for the M&PAs. The 40 hours of personal leave still is maintained in the A contract. However, in 2024, the 40 hours of leave will be restored to the M&PB contract, and the partial leave benefit has been maintained in both contracts for all salaried employees. As I mentioned before, M&P is aware with the increasing number of employees we represent who are overtime eligible, that if employees are transitioned to an hourly status, that the loss of this benefit is significant. So this will be discussed, the partial leave benefit for hourly employees will be discussed as a part of that ongoing chat in labor management. In terms of vacation leave, there is no change to your actual accrual rate. However, your vacation cash out has been maintained and actually increased to a maximum of 80 hours. It was 40 hours. That said, the 80-hour threshold that you must maintain in your bank is still the same. For illness leave, we have agreed to eliminate the FMLA OJI leave bank. Effective January 1 of 2023, the split leave bank would be combined into a single leave bank. So employees are not going to lose any of the time they've already accrued. It's just everything's going to be combined into one leave bank, and the 6-hour accrual would be maintained. So this is a success for M&P. Prior to having the two leave banks, the accrual rate was 4 hours. So it was increased to 3 hours in the last agreement, 3 hours for sick leave and 3 hours for FMLA. It will now just be 6 hours of straight sick leave with one bank going forward. Holidays, there's effectively no change. The day after Thanksgiving will be recognized in our contract as Native American Heritage Day, but there are no new holidays added to either of these TAs. That being said, for floating holidays, we will be adding Juneteenth. This will increase the total number of floating holiday hours from 40 to 48. And all employees will have the option to work on floating holiday dates, even if your office is closed to the public. Yes, this does include Martin Luther King Day. So this means if your office is closed, you will still have the option to go into the office or perhaps telework if you've got that arrangement. And then you would not have to use your floating holiday hours. You'd be able to bank those. The exception, of course, being if you do choose to take the day off, regardless of where you work, you do still have to use floating holiday hours for that day unless you are out sick. Okay, other types of leave addressed in the contract. Paternity leave has been redesignated as dependent care leave, although the functional amount of that leave is still the same, up to 4 weeks. We were able to add some language permitting employees in those circumstances to telework or work a modified work schedule, provided that that is prearranged and approved. Bereavement leave is also still in the contract. The language is being cleaned up, but there is effectively no change to the way that bereavement leave functions. And language has been explicitly added to the contract to permit flex time within the same pay period. It does explicitly say that your supervisor must approve this, but this allows employees to work, say, 6 hours one day and 10 hours the next, as long as you're achieving the 40-hour work week within your schedule. The city has no issue with that. The following changes are specific to the M&P-B agreement. Progressive promotions have been added to the TA, 3 of them to be exact. Assistant procurement specialist to procurement specialist. This was in prior versions of the contract as a buyer 1, buyer 2 progressive promotion. Engineer in training to associate engineer, and assistant planner 1 to assistant planner 2. All 3 of these have been added to the agreement. The existing progressive promotion for assistant urban designer to urban designer has been maintained as well. Also, the grievance procedure for the B contract has been updated. M&P successfully reduced the number of steps, grievance steps, from 5 down to 4. And we successfully modified the language to allow M&P to file grievances directly with HR. M&P recognizes this has been challenging for those supervisors that we represent. It's difficult when your own bargaining unit is filing a grievance addressed to you. No matter how many times I call folks and explain, this is not a personal issue. This is just the procedure. I know that that ruffles feathers and makes things hard. So M&P, through our negotiations team, did push with the city to establish a procedure so that when it is an issue outside of a supervisor's control, so if it's a procedural matter, a broader issue that we know stems from an administration level decision, we can file those grievances directly with HR rather than putting a supervisor in a position where they have to handle a grievance that they really aren't empowered to resolve anyway. It is also important to note that our final step, step 4, remains binding arbitration. That is no change from our past agreement, that there has been some confusion around whether or not M&P has binding arbitration. Yes, we do. Further changes to the M&P-B contract, the discipline section has been updated to remove the language on counseling. Counseling is not discipline. Counseling can be corrective in nature, or it can be recognizing positive performance from an employee. So counseling will now have its own section within the contract. And also, the limiting language for board participation has been removed. So in the last contract negotiations, the city successfully got language in that limited the ability specifically of our civil service personnel to participate on the M&P board. That language no longer exists in the TAs. So that's a plug to my civil service colleagues. We would love to have your support back on the M&P board. The exception, of course, to that being the chief examiner. We do not represent that position. Okay, other important factors in the TA, and we are back to discussing things that apply to both agreements. In addition to the wage-related topics I mentioned before, that it will be ongoing topics of conversation, we have added other issues as well, specifically teleworking and telecommuting. Obviously, this is been a huge impact on our membership here in the last few years with COVID impacts. We've seen a drastic increase in a desire to be teleworking and have discussed that at length with the city. The city recognizes that some action is appropriate on their part related to that. So we will have ongoing conversations within our labor management team. We will also be discussing a potential health and wellness program and things like leave banks for new hires. Full disclosure, there are other just sort of procedural issues, complaint processes and things of that nature that are on the list. I just didn't enumerate those because I didn't think the membership would be deeply interested in the nuts and bolts there. Language has also been clarified to state that if uniforms or PPE are required for your position, that the city must provide that and pay for it. Just to clarify, we've had some employees with confusion on that. We've also cleaned up and added language around the opt-in, opt-out process that's obviously new to us since Janus. There are limitations around how quickly employees must opt in order to be considered voting members. And I imagine this is something that some of our new hires will have discussions with board members about here as we come into voting for these TAs. But hopefully the addition of that language will clarify things for supervisors as well as for new employees as they join the city. Now to the city's ratification process, just a couple of quick updates here. The city is planning to brief these TAs at PIE's committee on October 24th and to get these before council for their review in November. I have heard through the grapevine that the process to provide compensation, adjusted compensation to Local 270 did take some time for the city to implement. I believe that adjusting wage rates is not an issue, but back pay, for example, takes a bit more time. So it is very much the hope of M&P, presuming that the membership approves of these TAs, that we are able to get some compensation in pockets before the end of 2022. That being said, the ability of the city to accomplish that is really going to depend on how promptly ratification is able to move forward. To that end, our constitution and bylaws mandate that from this briefing, I must give the membership 14 calendar days before I can ask you to vote. In the past, the membership has voted on contracts through hard copy paper ballots that had to be mailed back. Obviously, in that time frame since then, we have established the M&P website, and we will be using the website to facilitate electronic voting for these TAs. The timeline for that is to start on October 27th at 1 p.m. That is exactly 2 weeks from the scheduled conclusion of this session. Voting will then be available out on the M&P website until Tuesday, November 1st at 1 p.m. And I will be sending out email reminders to folks about this. You do only have the ability to vote once, and you may only vote on your contract. So if you are an M&PA, you vote for the appointed A agreement, yes or no. For the B, the same respectively. Please note that in order to vote, you must be a dues-paying member in good standing. That means you must have opted in promptly from your hire date to be a dues-paying member of M&P, and you must have an approved account out on the M&P website. I've listed the address there for you. If you do not already have an account, I strongly recommend you go out and register for one at the earliest convenience. Registrations are approved manually. So that means if you register on November 1st at 12:55 p.m., you may not get approved to vote before the voting closes. So again, strongly recommend that that registration is handled as promptly as possible. I made it through that in just about half an hour, which was my goal. So let's turn it over to questions. I'm going to scroll back through the chat to see what's been hanging out there. But if there are folks who would like to raise their hand and ask a question, please feel free. Okay, the first question I'm seeing is, could the wage and compensation study result in salary decreases, or would the result be only zero or salary increases? The language around how the wage and compensation study will be handled just explicitly states that it will be negotiated. So in the event that the study recommended a decrease of some kind, which based on all of the legwork that our labor management team has done and the negotiations we have had around salaries, I will say it is, I think, unlikely that there will be many, if any, M&P positions that are recommended for decrease. The impact of that would have to be negotiated with M&P. So there will be no impact to salaries without a corresponding negotiation. 270 members got their 2K and retro pay on the same check and were hit hard with taxes. Yes, that $2,000 payout is taxed differently because it is effectively a bonus as opposed to just retro compensation. That was part of the discussion for the negotiations team around the decision just to go forward with that January 1 date for retro compensation. Let's see. Was the addition of state-required long-term care insurance discussed? Yes. Yes, we did have some discussion around long-term care, and I anticipate we will have further discussion around that. What we're hearing out of the city is that they still have not been able to find an entity that will offer long-term care insurance without bundling it somehow with other types of insurance. And so effectively, it's just not realistic for the city to offer it to our employees as a benefit. That being said, we have pointed out that the impact of that state program around long-term care is an additional cost then that our employees have to manage, and that will be part of the discussion around insurance. Does the personal leave change effectively add 40 hours of leave per year? Yes. Yes, personal leave, to those who have not previously had it, personal leave is its own special leave bank that is 40 hours per year. So it's sort of like floating holidays in that way. It's a separate leave bank available to you in PeopleSoft. Was the add to pay for education discussed? Yes. Obviously, for those who have been out on the M&P website, we did put a laundry list, 43 proposals on the table to be exact. Every single proposal that M&P had uploaded out there was discussed. There is no impact to the education pay in this TA, but it was brought up to the city as a point of concern. Obviously, we are a bargaining unit of professional employees. We want to be supportive of furthering education as well as obtaining professional certifications. I do not anticipate at this time that will be an adjustment within the current contract, but it is very much something that those of us who participate in negotiating job descriptions, for example, as well as compensation, are keeping an eye out for. What happened to insurance available to retirees? Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with the specific insurance that's available to retirees. There's been no change. So whatever the historical understanding has been around that insurance, it remains exactly the same for the time being. I suppose it's possible that changes could be discussed when we negotiate insurance for changes in 2024, but I can say the negotiations team has paid very close attention to the spread of members within our association. So we've tried very intentionally to foster working environments that are friendlier to newer employees, those closer to the beginning of their career. That's where you see things like personal leave being added back in, that partial leave benefit being maintained, the illness leave bank being combined, that sort of thing. But also paid attention to the fact that we have a lot of career employees, right? Experienced folks who are closer to retirement than not. And that's where discussions around longevity pay, for example, were prompted by M&P. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make much progress on longevity pay specifically, but we were able to get things like an increase to that vacation buyout to reflect those employees who've been here a long time and are accruing very high levels of vacation. Will hopefully be able to put at least a little more money in your pockets with this contract. Again, presuming that it is approved by the membership. Are there any proposed changes to longevity pay? No. At this point, longevity pay is status quo, and I apologize, I should have specified that. Were the additional steps and salary increases associated with that discussed at length? It was the city's feeling that their salary, their wage and compensation study may help to address the issues with the steps. I will say our negotiations team would have very much preferred to get traction around the proposal that we put on the table to increase those steps. Unfortunately, the city was not amenable to that. Did I understand that Providence being added back to Premera plans is still being considered? Yes, yes. The negotiations team is very cognizant of the fact that Providence not being permitted within either Premera or Kaiser is a serious issue that impacts our membership. So we very much want to see Providence restored to coverage. And yes, that change would not be effective until January 1 of 2024. So unfortunately, we are stuck with the same existing status quo for 2023. Darren, I'm looking at your chart here with your comment, why such a huge gap? I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. So if there's a specific question you'd like answered there, please feel free to raise your hand or send something further in the chat.
Samantha, I believe
yes,
they're talking about, there was a couple of times it's been in the chat, the Social Security increase is 8.7% this year. The minimum wage is going up 5.8%, yet M&P is only going up 5.5%. So just, I think that was the question, why is there a gap?
Thank you, Dave. Yes. The Social Security increase, as well as just broadly impacts, inflationary impacts, what we've seen with CPI, all of that was discussed at length with the city. Obviously, M&P, to those who've been paying attention, M&P has been trying to negotiate this contract or some form of it for 18 months. And it's been quite a roller coaster economically within that 18-month period. The issue is that where we find ourselves with at this point is that the economy, the future indications economically are not positive. And while M&P has made every argument and put a laundry list of proposals on the table, the Social Security increase was pointed out to the city at length. The negotiations team reached a point where we felt that dragging out achieving a TA might actually negatively impact the membership with the direction that the economy is going. So for that reason, we felt that accepting the 5% on the table rather than pushing for an extra percentage or two made more sense. Because if we were to get into, say, a mediation type situation with the city, that will take months, and the economic situation at that point does not, the indicators are not that it would be in our favor. Angela, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On the retro payment, is there any way that we can have that rolled into deferred comp if we have the ability?
You know, we have not discussed that, but that is a good question, and I will inquire.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing some more questions coming in on the chat. If the contract is rejected, does it go to mediation? So that's a complicated question. Procedurally, no, it does not automatically go to mediation. If the contract is rejected, either contract, and they do get voted on separately, the A and the B. If either is rejected, then what happens is the parties go back to the bargaining table. So the city and M&P would get back together, and we would start from the last proposals that were put on the table. In an ideal world, the parties would continue bargaining at that point. What I can tell you is that, as I said, M&P has been trying to negotiate these contracts for 18 months. A very extensive effort has gone into reaching our current state. And so if these contracts are not approved, I think it is very likely that both parties will mutually agree we have achieved impasse. And that means we would choose to move to mediation. So the default process is not to go to mediation necessarily, but the impact here effectively would be that we would go to mediation. Yes. Is there a deadline for compensation review being completed? Within the term of the agreement. So M&P did attempt to negotiate a deadline, say 2023, 2024. Obviously, the city has limitations with their HR personnel right now. So they were very hesitant to agree to any kind of short abbreviated timeframe. So the reality is the deadline for the compensation study is completion and implementation by December 31st of 2026. Can the back pay come in on its own paycheck instead of adding it to a current check? I have not requested any specific format for back pay. I'm a bit leery of putting too many strings on that process because I believe it is going to be burdensome for the city even to get back pay issued before the end of 2022, and that is my top priority. So I will ask about having them perhaps on separate checks, as well as the discussion around deferred comp. But I do want to be transparent that the top priority is to get money in pockets before the holidays. Speaking of deferred comp, was there discussion about increasing monthly matching contribution? Yes, deferred comp was discussed in a couple of different ways. The negotiations team was aware that historic negotiations between the M&P-A and M&P-B contracts have handled deferred comp differently. And so, yes, there was a discussion of increasing that monthly match. There was no traction with the city on that proposal, unfortunately. Can vacation buyback be the same thing as separate check? I don't think we've ever done vacation buyback as a separate check. Obviously, that procedure is pre-existing for M&P. I will inquire, but my suspicion about that is that with everything that's going on at the city, they're probably not going to want to deviate from the historical practice on vacation cash out. I do understand why that would be requested, though. $270 can get extra pay for certifications. Yes. M&P is aware that in addition to Local 270, there's also certification pay and other bargaining unit contracts. And again, we did bring that up as a point of concern. We're supposed to be the bargaining unit of professionals, and certifications go right along with that. The city was not willing, as a broad stroke, to negotiate additional compensation for education or certification pay. But as I said, M&P is able to bring that up as we are negotiating job descriptions and salaries for new and revised positions. And increasingly, we are seeing positions revised given all of the turnover and restructuring that we're seeing at the city. So we are doing our best to ensure that that rolls out to the members as those things come across our table. Does the salary review require the city to raise salaries based on recommendations? No, is the short answer. Whatever the results of the salary study indicate, it will then fall to M&P and the city to bargain the impacts of those. So of course, anytime that the study indicates a salary rate should be increased, M&P is going to argue very vociferously for that. And based on, again, the reviews of positions, the negotiations we've been in so far, we feel confident that in order to be competitive, increases in salaries are going to be necessary. Top priority should be getting M&P properly compensated. Agreed. When the negotiations team had discussions specifically around personal leave, there was a lot of chat about, is it more important to increase wages or get that leave back? I know that a lot of M&PBs were upset that that benefit was negotiated away in the last process. And so it was a huge priority for us to get that restored. However, you don't have to be a procurement professional to know that the cost of everything has gone through the roof. And so ultimately, we were all in consensus that wages are top priority. And like I said, that is why we wanted to front load those 5% increases in 2022 and 2023 to achieve that compounding effect, right? So that wage adjustments can go as far as possible for folks. Is the vacation buyback in November, would that be delayed for ratification of the contract? Vacation buyback is already in our current contract. If the modified agreement is not ratified in time, then there may be an impact to the extra optional 40 hours. I will have that discussion with the city. I believe the way that that process has historically always worked is that the forms go out in November and the payout occurs in early December, but I will verify that. Vacation buybacks issued first paycheck in November. Yeah. Oh. Did the issue of the city's projected budget shortfall affect negotiations? The city has been telling us, I'm trying to recall how long it's been now, since last fall, that there was no money to pay for anything. So in terms of the amount of shortfall, no, the specifics were not discussed, but yes, the city has been claiming for a long time that there was no funding really to support adjustments. That being said, M&P was able to successfully negotiate the wage rates that you have seen here in the TA. So certainly the reality of, as I said, the economic situation has impacted things, but in terms of specific from the city, no, we were able to successfully negotiate around that. Retiring medical in 270 is effective April 2017. 270s had this since 2017. In terms of retiree medical, I'm going to work with our benefits folks to get an idea of what's being referred there. That's not my area of expertise, not something that I have personally had to deal with. So we'll have to follow up on on that. I was not specifically aware of a difference between M&P and Local 270's retiree coverage. But since we already have on the table the option to discuss insurance for 2024, this is the time for us to be doing that research. And certainly we would want our members to enjoy at least the same standard as Local 270. So I appreciate that coming up. Does the retroactive wage increase apply to project employees? The wage increase applies to all employees that are represented by M&P. Regardless of if you were full-time project employee, what have you, these rates are effective for every employee that is subject to the contract. Okay. Questions are starting to slow down, I think, a bit. Do they go off the step we are currently on when they do retro pay? Yes, I guess I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure what that question is intending to address. Yes, the 5% rate for 2022 would be compounded off of whatever step you are currently being paid upon. So if you're step 3, your step 3 wage is going to go up by 5%, for example.
Just to clarify too, is if you've had a change in pay grade over the year, you'll get your back pay for whatever grade you were at that time. So if you were 6 months at one grade and 6 months another one, you'll get the 5% based off of those. So that's how it works out.
Thank you, Dave. Yes. And this retro compensation does apply, like I said, to all employees represented by M&P. So for our colleagues who are working at the city until, June of 2022, they will receive a retro check for that additional compensation from January 1 to whatever date they separated employment. So the retro pay does not discriminate. It is for one and all. Angie, I'm seeing your comment here. Thank you to all the board members for your work and energy. Appreciate that recognition. And yes, very grateful to our negotiations team and the board for all the legwork here. Was a shorter contract considered since future inflation is such an unknown? Yes, the term of the contract was discussed back and forth with the city. We were very aware that Local 270's contract expires in 2025. And we did not, part of the struggle, the reason it's taken 18 months for us to achieve this contract is because the city was effectively negotiating with all of the bargaining units at once, right? There is a bandwidth, a limitation issue on the city end of how many negotiations they can be handling at the same time. So we very much wanted to stagger our contract off of Local 270 so that we were not negotiating in the same period. That meant potentially going into either 2026 or shortening to 2024. That would effectively put us right back into negotiations after ratification of this agreement, and we didn't want to go the shorter route. So that's where we landed on 2026. The recording for this will be made available early next week at the absolute latest. The PowerPoint slides that have been presented here will be emailed out for everybody this afternoon. So you'll be able to see the numbers and the details in hard copy print. It's just going to take me a little while longer to get the recording out to everyone. Thank you, Josh, for your recognition. Much appreciated. Okay, I know we're running a bit tight on time here. Again, if you want to throw out a last minute question, feel free to raise your hand. In lieu of any other questions coming in, if you didn't feel comfortable asking questions in this forum, please feel free to reach out to the board member of your choice. I'm happy, as well as any other board member, to talk to you about what's going on. The thing I want everybody to go away from is that I feel very confident in this contract, and I very much hope that you feel comfortable voting for it. It has been a long haul and a heavy lift to get it before you, but we're thrilled to be in a position to hopefully get some additional compensation in your pockets before the end of the year. So thank you all for your time. And again, feel free to email, call, or otherwise contact the board member of your choice if you've got questions that didn't get addressed here. Have an excellent afternoon, everybody.